Samantha Cole's heart skipped as she stepped into the quiet hallway, clipboard in hand. Her eyes locked onto the 3 K-9s blocking her path: Titan, Ace, and Shadow. They didn't growl. They didn't bark. They just stared. And in that silence, she felt the weight of something far worse than any reprimand. "I'm with the HOA," she stammered. Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "You're in my house without permission. Explain, now." Before she could respond, Titan lunged, not to bite, but to hold her still. And then the door behind her creaked open. Was someone else inside? Samantha Cole had never liked surprises. As the president of Silverwood Heights HOA, she was used to controlling everything: every lawn, every fence, every neighbor's sense of decorum. But stepping into Ethan Holt's home without permission was a new kind of power play, one that sent a jolt of unease through her. She had studied him from a distance: his off-duty sheriff's vehicle in the driveway, his retired K-9 roaming the yard. But today was different. Today, she needed more than just her usual passive-aggressive tactics. She needed to see what kind of man would dare challenge her rules. Samantha's perfectly pressed blouse and neat visor made her seem every bit the professional she claimed to be. But behind her polite smile, there was only a hunger for control. She had decided long ago that Silverwood Heights would be a haven of order, where no one dared to rock the boat. And when Ethan moved in, with his law enforcement background and his intimidating dogs, she saw him as a threat to everything she had worked for. She had tried warnings, she had tried rules, but none of it had worked. So now she would force compliance, one way or another. And when the dog lunged, she knew this was a line she might not be able to cross. But she wasn't ready to back down yet. Ethan Holt didn't mind the quiet. In fact, he sought it. After years of serving on the force and countless sleepless nights patrolling the streets, the peace of Silverwood Heights felt like a balm. His small home at the end of a cul-de-sac was a world away from the chaos he had left behind. No sirens, no flashing lights, no calls for backup. Just the trees, the wind, and his 3 K-9s, Titan, Ace, and Shadow. They were his only companions now. Titan, the oldest and most serious of the three, had seen too much. The bond between them was unspoken but strong, built on years of trust forged in the heat of dangerous situations. Ace, younger and more energetic, was Ethan's constant shadow, always seeking attention and affection. Shadow, quiet and observant, seemed to understand the emotional weight of silence better than anyone else. Together, they were his family, his only family. But that peace had begun to crack when Samantha Cole, the HOA president, entered his life. It started small. A letter here, a complaint there, things that seemed petty. A note about his patrol vehicle, another about the way his dog's bark disturbed the tranquility. Ethan had shrugged them off at first. It wasn't anything new. People like Samantha Cole, who had nothing better to do than enforce their narrow vision of what life should look like. But when she showed up at his door, unannounced, clipboard in hand, it was different. She wasn't just some overzealous neighbor. She was a force, a woman with a deep sense of entitlement, someone who believed that her rules were law. And when she started pushing, Ethan felt something inside him stir. The calm he had worked so hard to build began to slip away. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his. The kind of life he had earned after the war, after everything he had seen and done. He wasn't interested in playing by anyone else's rules, especially not when those rules made no sense. It was then that he realized Samantha wasn't just fighting against his dogs, his vehicles, or his lifestyle. She was fighting against his right to exist peacefully. He had tried to stay out of the fight, but she had made it impossible. Now, with the confrontation at his doorstep, he was done avoiding it. He would stand his ground. For a while, Ethan managed to ignore the constant nuisance that Samantha Cole had become. Her petty violation notices were a daily reminder of her overreaching control, each one more absurd than the last. The intimidating appearance of his patrol SUV sitting in his driveway. Ghost's bark, calm, deep, and commanding, deemed aggressive. Even the smallest adjustments he made to his home were scrutinized. The repairs on his back fence marked as unapproved MO. At first it was manageable. Ethan had become accustomed to people who didn't understand him or his way of life. He'd been the odd one out for years. But there was something about Samantha's persistence that began to wear him down, chipping away at the peace he had fought, so Ethan wasn't a confrontational man by nature. His years as a K-9 handler had taught him patience, observation, and quiet strength. He preferred the silence, the way the wind rustled the leaves on the trees outside. But Samantha's obsession with his life, her invasion of his privacy, left him feeling exposed. She wasn't just criticizing his life. She was trying to erase it, to mold him into something he wasn't. His dogs noticed the change before he did. Titan's protective instincts kicked in during their walks, his ears twitching at every shadow, his steps more deliberate. Ace, always the playful one, became unusually still, watching the distant neighbors with a wariness Ethan hadn't seen before. And Shadow, ever the silent observer, seemed to sense that something darker was coming, his gaze constantly flicking toward the house, his tail stiff with tension. It wasn't long before Samantha's tactics escalated from simple complaints to more invasive actions. Late one night, Ethan caught her on camera standing at the gate to his backyard. She was trying the combination lock on the gate, testing it as if she had every right to be there. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show her deliberate movements, her face lit by the soft glow of the streetlight as she fiddled with the lock. The footage sent a chill through Ethan. He had known she was pushing the boundaries, but this was crossing a line. He saved the clip to a thumb drive, his fingers tightening around the cold plastic. The act of recording felt almost mechanical, another way to keep control when everything around him was slipping. He had already started to change his schedule, working more night shifts so he could be home during the day, but this was different. The violation was no longer just inconvenient. It was personal. The next day, the HOA's final notice arrived. Another round of petty complaints, each one more ridiculous than the last. Unapproved security lighting, a small fence repair that wasn't up to code, a letter accusing him of harboring a dangerous animal, Ghost, who spent most of his days napping on the couch. But the real kicker was the final line. Failure to comply will result in further action, including property inspections authorized under Section 14 of the HOA covenants. Ethan stared at the page for a long time, his mind racing. Section 14 was clear. Exterior inspections only, no interior access. But this threat, this attempt to cross into his private space, was different. It was as if Samantha thought she had the power to invade his life entirely, and that was something Ethan would not allow. He spent the next few days preparing, installing additional cameras, reviewing footage obsessively. Each night he would sit in his kitchen, eyes glued to the small screen, watching for any signs of intrusion. And then, one evening, it happened. The deadbolt on his front door felt gritty, as though someone had recently tampered with it. He tried not to jump to conclusions, but his gut told him otherwise. Ethan pulled up the footage from the morning, fast-forwarding through the timestamps until he saw it. Samantha, again, at his door. She had tried the knob first, then pulled out the keyring of master keys she had used to let herself into the house. His blood ran cold. There it was, the footage he had been dreading. Samantha, in broad daylight, using a key she had no right to have, trying to open his front door. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. She had planned it. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was an outright violation. And that's when he knew he couldn't let it go on any longer. The next day, as he changed his schedule again to be home when she might make her next move, he felt a strange sense of inevitability settle over him. He was ready. He would confront her face to face and end this once and for all. But it was the way things unfolded that truly shocked him. It started with the soft creak of the front door opening, an all too familiar sound. He had left the chain lock on, and he heard it catch, just as he had planned. He remained still, hidden behind the entryway bench, his phone in hand, ready to record. Samantha eased the door open, stepping cautiously inside, unaware of the silent observer waiting in the shadows. It was then that Titan rose from his place on the floor, moving silently, his body low, eyes locked on her. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "You're trespassing, Samantha. I've given you enough chances to explain yourself. Now, you're going to answer for it." Samantha's face went pale. Her eyes flicked to the camera Ethan had set up, the one trained on the doorway. Her hand reached instinctively for the master keyring at her belt, but it was too late. Titan moved closer, positioning himself perfectly between her and the door. His eyes were calm, but there was a warning in his stance. Samantha froze, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan stepped forward, his voice cool and controlled. "You've crossed the line, Samantha, and this time, I'm not letting it go." Samantha Cole's eyes flicked between Ethan and the 3 K-9s standing guard at the door. Titan, Ace, and Shadow didn't bark, didn't growl. They simply stood, poised and unmoving, watching her every move. The silence was suffocating. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the depth of her mistake. She had underestimated Ethan Holt, his patience, his resolve, and most of all, his dogs. She thought she could control the situation, force him to comply, but now she was trapped in his home, her every move monitored. Ethan stood still in the doorway, the weight of his gaze fixed on her. "You're trespassing, Samantha," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "And it's about time you answer for it." Samantha's lips trembled. I was just doing my job, Noah. The HOA, they rely on me. I have to make sure everything's in order." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Your job doesn't include breaking into people's homes. You had no right to be here, no right to use that master key." Her fingers twitched toward the keyring that had fallen to the floor when Titan had pinned her. She had hoped to keep it hidden, to keep her secret, but now it was out in the open. The tool that had given her power, now exposed for what it was, a breach of trust, a violation of privacy. Ethan stepped forward, his posture steady. "I've tried to be patient. I've tried to ignore the petty violation notices. But this?" He gestured to the K-9s, who remained perfectly still. "This is where I draw the line." Samantha opened her mouth to protest, but the words stuck in her throat. She wanted to defend herself, to argue that she had done this for the greater good of the community, but it felt hollow now, her excuses slipping away as the reality of her actions set in. "I'm not a criminal," she said, her voice desperate. "I'm just trying to protect the neighborhood. The HOA..." "The HOA isn't above the law," Ethan interrupted, his voice unwavering, "and neither are you." Behind him, Titan shifted, his body moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator. Samantha flinched, taking a small step back, her eyes darting between the dog and Ethan. She felt trapped, caught in the web of her own making, with no way to escape. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed without hesitation, his fingers swift as he hit the buttons. "Hi, this is Deputy Holt," he said into the receiver, his voice calm and professional. "I need to report a burglary in progress. The suspect is currently detained." Samantha's face drained of color as she realized what was happening. "Burglary?" she whispered, disbelief in her eyes. "Yes, burglary," Ethan confirmed. "You used a master key to enter my home without my consent, and now you're about to face the consequences." The sirens could already be heard in the distance, growing louder. The patrol car was only minutes away. Samantha's breathing became erratic, her mind scrambling for an explanation, a way out. But it was too late. "You can't do this," she protested, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. "You don't understand what's at stake. The HOA..." "The HOA's overreach ends here," Ethan replied, his tone firm. "And your actions have consequences." Titan took another step forward, his massive form blocking her from retreating. He wasn't aggressive, but there was no mistaking the message in his stance. She wasn't leaving without facing the truth. As the patrol car pulled up outside, Samantha's face twisted in frustration and fear. Ethan stepped back, allowing the officers to move in. Deputy Castillo, who had worked with Ethan for years, assessed the situation with a quick glance. His eyes fell on the K-9s, still standing watch at the door, and then to Samantha, who was now visibly shaking. "I think we've got enough to go on," Castillo said, his voice calm but authoritative. He nodded at the officers, who moved to apprehend Samantha. "Please," Samantha begged, her voice rising in desperation. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to help." But Ethan wasn't swayed. "Help? You've been spying, sneaking around my property, and violating my rights. There's no helping that." As Samantha was escorted away, her eyes locked on Ethan's one last time. "You'll regret this," she spat. But the anger in her voice was drowned by the finality of the situation. The officers secured her, reading her rights as Ethan stood back, watching. The footage was clear. The evidence was undeniable. Samantha Cole, once the powerful president of the HOA, was now just another criminal facing the law she thought she could manipulate. Ethan turned to Titan, Ace, and Shadow, giving each of them a brief nod. They had done their part. And now, for the first time in a long while, Ethan could breathe easy again. Samantha Cole's car disappeared down the street, the flashing lights of the patrol car slowly fading into the distance. Ethan stood at the edge of his porch, watching the scene unfold, but there was no satisfaction in his gaze. No relief either. He had done what needed to be done, but it felt quiet, hollow even. It wasn't about winning. It was about protecting what was his. Titan, Ace, and Shadow were by his side, silent sentinels, watching the neighborhood like they always had. Ethan's eyes lingered on the dogs for a moment, grateful for their loyalty, their calmness. They were the family he had built after leaving the chaos of his past behind, his silent companions in a world that often felt too loud. They had sensed the danger before he did, their reactions always sharp and precise. When Titan had lunged at Samantha, it hadn't been aggression. It had been the professional instinct to neutralize a threat. Ethan had known it was time to act, and the dogs had been right there with him, supporting him the whole way. The silence around him now was different, though. The kind of silence that settled when something had been left unsaid. He wasn't sure if it was because the fight had ended or because there was no real closure yet, but whatever it was, it lingered. Later, Deputy Castillo stopped by. Ethan had expected him, but it didn't make the conversation any easier. "We'll be taking action with the HOA, Castillo said, handing Ethan a file. "Samantha's actions caught up with her. You were right about her. She's been on a power trip for years and the company's not happy." Ethan nodded, glancing over the paperwork. He felt no pride in being right, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that something had changed. For him, for his dogs, for his neighborhood. "What now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. "The HOA is going to need a full overhaul," Castillo replied. "But for now, you've done your part. You took a stand. Not a lot of people do that." The words hung in the air, a weight lifting from Ethan's shoulders. He didn't need approval, but it was good to hear someone recognize it. Not every battle had to end in a public spectacle. Not every victory needed a parade. Sometimes, just standing your ground was enough. As Castillo left, Ethan watched him walk down the path, then turned back to the house. The quiet was no longer unsettling. It felt peaceful, like a door had finally closed on something that had been hanging open for far too long. The dogs remained by his side, each of them finding their place on the porch with him. Titan, always the calmest, lay at his feet, eyes half closed in a relaxed vigil. Ace, energetic as ever, sprawled beside him, stretching lazily. Shadow remained alert, his gaze flicking back and forth over the yard, always watching. Ethan sat down on the porch steps, taking a deep breath. The air was cool, and the soft rustle of leaves echoed in the distance. His gaze lifted to the sky, where the first stars of evening were beginning to shine. It was a clear night, no clouds, no haze, just the quiet comfort of the world around him. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you did what was right, even when the world tried to tell you to keep your head down. He had fought for his right to live quietly, to protect what was his, and he had won. But the fight wasn't the point. The point was that he had finally taken control, not just of his property, but of his life. The peace was his now, and it was something he wouldn't let anyone take away again. Ethan looked down at his dogs, the only family he needed. "Good boys," he murmured, his voice soft. And for the first time, the silence felt like home.